morning, Satish. The topic today is perhaps two topics, an amalgamation of two topics which are uh, very dear to India and the progress India is making on the economic front, right? We're talking about technology and we're talking about technology in automotive industry. Both these India plays a critical role, not just as a big market, but I think India plays a big role in the global economic value chain as well in both these sectors. So without taking much time, my first question, Satish, as a managing director of Elektrobit India, is how do you see these emerging technologies and softwares impacting the automotive industry? I mean, where do you see this going in the next 5 years or 10 years? How is the impact going to be?
Firstly, thanks a lot, Viswanath, for having me here, and also thanks to ET Edge Insights. Actually, it's an interesting question. It's more like gambling at this point in time, because the impact of software is not just in the automotive industry, but also in nearby industries. And let me start with the nearby industries, if that's okay. I think there will be impacts to banking and insurance, the way we visualize automotive industry driven by emerging tech and software. Yeah? And I'll explain that in a little bit later. The first part is the impact is all across the value stream. So how we develop vehicles, how we produce them, and what happens after it is produced. And let me get into this concept, which is called software-defined vehicles. So in the past, I mean, software has been in vehicles for the longest time, yeah, even in India. And the software used to be very tightly coupled to the hardware. So specific functionality of the software, and today's cars have anywhere between 10 to maybe in certain cases also 100 what we call electronic control units or small chips. Yeah. With software and emerging tech, you have to visualize it in a way that how the mobile phones look like. So if you go back to the times where we had Nokia 3310, yeah, the software was only able to do so much. Today, basically on your smartphones, software does everything, and this will be the way also the vehicle will go forward. Software will be used to enable, influence, disable functionalities that we have not been used to. And this means that you can do a lot of things in the car with regards to new features, new functionalities, without having to visit the dealership. So everything happens over the air, a lot like how we are used to in the mobile phone industry. And if you talk just about the automotive industry, then we today have car manufacturers which are SOP driven, start of production driven. This will change to continuous vehicle lifecycle management. So what software version is running on which vehicle? Yeah. So which means that you will need some kind of a software operations center that car manufacturers will have to run. It also means a potential change in the revenue models or commercial logic. A vehicle may no longer be a single instance sale. The evolving vehicle network architectures today is making the entire software and electronic setup extremely complex, and the need to differentiate one brand from the other is even greater today. So if the network infrastructure looks similar, then what makes it different from brand A to brand B? Lastly, and this is also my fear, the car might just become just another IoT device. Yeah. So in that case, now what will happen to the cars that I drive? Will the color of the car matter? Will the shape, will the segment of the car matter, or is it just another device which I'm going to use to hook up to the internet? So that's on the automotive industry. And like I spoke a little bit earlier about insurance and banking, what happens with software is data management becomes, or data collection, management and analysis becomes that much easier possibly. So with predictive maintenance, for example, or predictive diagnostics, you can collect data that insurance and banking companies can use to reformulate their business logic. So the impacts are huge, not just for automotive, but also for industries adjacent.
Wow. I was just personally reading and trying to see, and I kind of like the statement you made, right? Historically, the software in the vehicles were tuned to the hardware. The hardware was the primary, but you said we are going where uh, the software may become the primary, the hardware may become pretty much incidental, right? Pretty much how
That's
most
right.
of the mobile phones, smartphones today operate.
Correct.
Right?
Absolutely.
On that question, therefore, what I wanted to check is how does this thing about software-defined vehicle?
Mhm.
There are a lot of people who are saying that look, it's just another term. It's very difficult to monetize it, or it's really years before some of this can be monetized.
Mhm.
But we also know that how technology is moving exponentially, right?
Mhm.
So where do you see this SDV concept moving in the next 5 years? Will companies be able to monetize what they are trying to do in the near future?
Oh, $1 million question. So, I mean, like I said, so SDV is basically the approach where software influences just about everything that the vehicle is perceived as. So, software, you have features disabling, enabling, all being done by software, as opposed to the electromechanical systems that we had in the past. Yeah, which means that most vehicle manufacturers would need to look at software and therefore tech as an extremely critical aspect of their value chain or production manufacturing life cycle. So this is not what companies are used to. Yeah. So we at Elektrobit, and I myself see it in different forms. But to address the question, I think monetization becomes possibly the most important challenge to solve, because the end consumer is still buying a vehicle. Yeah. So and people buy vehicles for different reasons. As for some, it's a status symbol. For others, in the Indian context, mileage is still important. Maybe in the Western context, what's my brake horsepower. But the most important part is the investments that we intend to make in software. How could we monetize it? Now, this is with the assumption that the software in the car is firstly safe, secure, brought into a timely manner, and can create a differentiation. So there are lots of ifs before we get to the monetization part. But if we need to talk about monetization, then first we must reimagine the vehicle as such. So it may no longer be the traditional one-time payment model. Yeah. So today I buy a car at the dealership. Unless I send it back to the service center of my vehicle manufacturer, typically the OEMs don't make money. Yeah. And in certain ecosystems, the car need not go back to the OEM's dealership. So you can get it done from mechanics somewhere nearby. So for the OEM, at least in India, there has been only a single opportunity to sell a vehicle and therefore monetize. This might change. And the reason why I say this might change is because with software, you have the possibility to upgrade to new features, maybe enable certain things based on the weather or the months of the year. And therefore, the idea of owning a car potentially also gets reimagined. So let me take some examples. So with feature enablement, let's talk about theft management services. Yeah. So if I'm in a city like Bangalore, maybe, and I am parked in my apartment garage, getting the car stolen is maybe not as probable. But if I'm, let's say, in some other part of India where I'm parking it on the road, for me, theft management service is that much more important. So maybe should I enable a theft management system when I'm driving around on a vacation, things like that. Emergency assistance alerts, for instance. An exaggerated example could also be a travel guide. Yes, I'm arriving now, let's say, somewhere in Goa, and instead of using my mobile phone, I have the car telling me, hey, this part of Goa, you have the best resorts, or this part of Goa, you have the best casinos, things like that. Yeah. So these are services that can be integrated, at a later point in time, despite the vehicle being the same. Like I said, predictive diagnostics will become an interesting feature in any case for the OEMs. So which means that the OEMs are able to tell you, hey, you will have a brake pad problem in the next 3 months. Why don't you come back to my service center? So these are features that we need to think about as subscription models, like you have, let's say, apps on the phones. And we need to find out if the end consumer is willing to pay. The challenge right now is how the end consumer looks at the vehicle. However, with increasing demand of features, it becomes interesting for the end consumer also maybe not to pay a lump sum amount at the beginning, but only to enable and disable features. Let me take an example of a German OEM who tried to bring in the seat heating feature as subscription model. So they said, why do you need seat heating 12 months of the year? You only need it for the colder months. So enable seat heating for a certain amount of euros per month. We will enable and disable it by a software switch. So these are models in which you could potentially monetize. It isn't yet clear how the commercial logic should look like. Do you still want the consumer to pay one time at the beginning for your entire software costs, or do you want to pay in subscription? But the most important part is most of the car manufacturers or all car manufacturers must think about it as a platform approach. So we need to now break down these software techs into what is reusable components and what is differentiating components. Yeah, reusable could also be non-differentiating. A non-differentiating could be, let's say, a bad example would be the equivalent of the Windows operating system. So an operating system is needed in every laptop, right? So we call it non-differentiating. The apps that we install on top is differentiating. So the middleware part, which is needed in just about every platform or hardware that you implement in the car, we need to talk about how can we standardize it so that you can reduce your initial software development costs, and then talk about if there are OEMs who are cash rich, who get into a certain direction and talk about leasing or reselling their software platforms to other OEMs. But that these are all ways in which you monetize. So for example, the cash rich OEMs today who are already in this direction of creating platforms, they monetize their investments by leasing their software platforms to other OEMs. And the follower OEMs who don't make this invest don't have to talk about capital investments in software, don't have to talk about reimagining themselves as a technology organization, but just rent this out or lease this out. So opportunities are galore. The only thing I can say is collaboration probably is the only way forward.
Oh, that's fantastic, because that brings down to the next question. This is going to bring in far more partnership between the pure software technology solution providers and the OEM people, right?
Correct.
And the question was, how is this going to change the make or buy mindset? And I think you kind of answered it almost, right? Some of them may choose a make or buy, but some of them could also collaborate. And
correct.
That's going to open up very different business models and the ways of operation coming into the market.
True. So the fear so the fears and the risks vary based on whether you are a car manufacturer, a tier 1 provider, or let's say a pure tier 2 or a services provider. So broadly categorizing, you have some of them becoming also a software / technology player, and others being what we call a brick or mortar player, which means that you're just a hardware box provider. Yeah. So I give you a box and somebody puts the software intelligence on top. So I think firstly, the industry will somehow have to divide itself into these parts. Do I want to be in the box creating part, or the creating the intelligence part? So, and the intelligence part is slightly more abstract and also new for manufacturing industry. So that's the first way to look at it. How the make or buy or collaborate mindset will happen is actually also going to be interesting. I think the profit-making OEMs who have the wherewithal to make investments and convert themselves into a tech organization and then sustain themselves over a period of time could claim the advantage of, let's say, a certain kind of vertical integration. Yeah. So in our parlance, we call them the lead pack. So these are the OEMs or companies which are talking about, I'm going to make this software investment irrespective of whether it is paid off in a certain commercial logic or not, but this is now how I'm going to do. So there are certain OEMs, especially in Germany, who are talking about creating their own operating system. Yeah, so they don't want to buy an operating system from somebody else outside. So that's one way of looking at it. The majority of the follower OEMs, I mean, we call them followers, we need to take a call on whether they lease certain things out from these lead pack or they want to collaborate. And collaborate here could also be in very, very different forms. So one way to look at it is to say, hey, what open source could I reuse? Yeah. So, I mean, we have open source technology. So Android, for example, is one possibility. What part of open source Android can I bring into the car? Can I have my infotainment system running on Android? Can I take those risks with open source? So these are all the questions that will need to be answered. However, collaboration would probably be the only way forward, because whether you make it yourself or you buy it from outside, the risk now of something not working lies with the car manufacturer. So earlier, if you had, let's say, a problem in the car and there was a recall, the procurement guys would be the most important ones that you have to manage. Yeah, because these are the guys who say, hey, this tier one has a problem, blacklist them. This will somehow disappear now, because if I am making it myself, then I am accountable for my mistakes. If I'm buying it purely from outside and I'm buying software, how do I know that in my range of 10, 15 suppliers, the problem is with this organization or this partner? So I think we will see a lot of standardization. We will see a lot of collaborations. And at this point in time, we will see collaborations between government bodies and also private organizations. So it is only a matter of time before this happens. But we see a mix based on how each of the OEMs are placed financially.
Understood. No, very, very interesting perspective from your side, Satish. I want to ask two questions, one about India and one about your own business. So maybe I'll ask the question about India first. See, India has been a fairly notable player in the automotive value chain globally, right? If you take tier one vendors, and also for vehicle manufacturers to be used as a manufacturing base for global trade. Independently, we have also been able to get some reasonable global share in the software technology area as well. Now, when these two combine, do you see that India has a great role or a great potential to be a global top two, top three provider of solutions and all that? Where do you see that for the country as a whole, and what is the implication for, say, policymakers or education system in the country or whatever?
So I personally believe that we are probably better positioned than we were ever in the past. So, I mean, so we are one of those, actually we are one of the only countries at this point in time which has access to talent at a reasonable cost, and therefore the value we provide is that much more exponential. So I think we are perfectly positioned. There is no better time than today for an university graduate to walk out. So I think the opportunities are tremendous. What we need to leverage, of course, is like you rightly said. So the R&D space is ripe for us. I mean, we have, I think, more than 1,400 R&D centers in India, at least in the engineering space. I think there is not a single automotive R&D company that does not exist in India in some form. So we have also access to that global know-how. So that's exactly what we do, for example, at Elektrobit. So we learn from our global counterparts who've been doing this for decades, and we see how can I bring it into a frugal economy like India. And I think this will continue to happen. So India is actually perfectly positioned, not just to provide talent to the global setup. We will also be an important and interesting manufacturing hub, maybe not in terms of the full vehicle, but at component levels. I think this will eventually happen, given also the international ecosystem, the geopolitical situation that we see. And last but not the least, this will have a snowball effect on OEMs that exist in India, because one is the demand of the end consumers are changing. So I want, for instance, the same experience that, let's say, somebody in the West gets. I'm ready to pay the money, although a little bit lesser, but I will ask questions, but I want the same experience. And therefore, the quality and the overall value of the products that we develop in and from India will only go up. I mean, the two-wheeler electric vehicle segment is a classic example for us. So we operate in the segment in India, and we see tremendous technology advancements in this area, not just with regards to how the end consumer wants the product, but also in terms of how the manufacturers and the value stream, the tier 1 and the tier 2 suppliers are also thinking. So I think all in all, we are looking at really good times. And hopefully this also helps us with our greenhouse emissions when we talk about EVs. Yeah, so we will have hopefully less dependence on fossil fuels than we've had in the past. So
Right.
I think it augurs well.
Augurs well, right. And one question what I want to ask about Elektrobit, right? Across, I mean, if you see in India, everyone talked about the great resignation. So attrition is a challenge. Talent retention becomes a challenge. In the post-COVID scenario, managing hybrid workforce became a challenge. How do you manage these challenges as Elektrobit India? How are you coping with the challenge?
I think firstly, we are trying all we can to float over these challenges. So these problems are real, and like I said, it's while it is a problem for the organization, it's an opportunity for our people. Yeah? So we have to look at it this way. So one way for me to tackle the issue is see what opportunities can I create so that people are attracted to Elektrobit rather than disengaged. So we are trying our best. Of course, we try to bring in a good atmosphere. I mean, we try to bring in compensation packages which are class leading, policies, privileges. We try to also provide as much work from home as possibly can be. I must say this brand differentiation in India is a challenge for various reasons that we spoke about. So if you stay only in an R&D space, there is always going to be a player who's better, bigger, can take care of you in a different form. So what we try to do, and this is the reason why we had a pivot a couple of years ago. So we started as an R&D center, but we said, hey, we need to service the local market, because then I can give my typical R&D engineer the experience of speaking to a customer, understanding how profit and loss for a certain business looks like. What does it mean to bring a component to a vehicle, which in turn is sold in the market? So we are trying to do everything that we can. I must also say talent availability and retention for automotive is in general a concern, because as you bring in more tech into automotive or more software, you must understand that I am not just competing with the automotive brands, I'm competing with the entire, let's say, the who's who of the technology landscape. So I'm competing with the, let's say, the biggest search engine provider, all the way to an operating system provider, to an automotive player, to maybe an aerospace player. Yeah? Because the tech is similar, or the backbone seems to be similar. So it will remain a huge problem, but like I said, for the country, it's a great opportunity. So I think we will find our place somewhere, as long as we do the right thing. So yes, challenges remain, but we will figure a way out.
It's been fantastic. The last few questions, right? What really took me, and maybe allow me to just summarize the top 3-4 points. I think we're going to see software determining the hardware that goes into vehicles. You've talked about how cars can actually become IoT devices, right? I mean, in what way that's also scary, because not only do you need to, then everything about around you knows everything about you, right? Right from the phone to your system and that'll extend to cars. It's going to bring a lot of technology, which means you talked about how different economic models, business models will evolve. The cash-rich OEMs looking at different model, the other kind of OEMs looking at collaboration. And then we talked about the great opportunity that this poses for a country like India, given our space. So fantastic, Satish. It's been wonderful having you as part of the ET Leadership Series. Thanks a lot for your time, and thanks to ET for having us over for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much for your time, Viswanath, and thanks again to ET